In this episode, we speak to Ed Keelan, partner at Octopus Ventures. Ed shares with us his experiences growing up with dyslexia, pursuing his passion for entrepreneurship and a career in venture capital.
With over 13 years of investing experience, Ed talks us through growing up in an entrepreneurial family, the lessons this taught him from a young age, and his commitment to mentoring young people who wouldn't typically have access to such careers. Thanks, Ed, for joining us on the Leadership Unplugged podcast. Thank you for inviting us to your offices as well. So we're going to get straight into it, talking about your journey to date, your leadership route, and where you are now. But I wanted to take it back all the way to the beginning, and I wanted to ask you, if you had the chance to describe yourself to someone without mentioning what you do for a living, how would you do that?
Oh, well, yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, and great to be here. If I was to describe myself without mentioning my work, I'd say generally somebody who's enthusiastic, likes new ideas, and is always kind of trying to find out something new and find out what the next part of the journey is all about. Is that good enough? I don't know.
It's a tough
I
question.
never really thought about it.
Yeah, definitely a tough question. It's actually a question that I think has been playing on my mind, maybe subconsciously quite recently, trying to not define myself based on the career itself. I think that can be quite easy to do, especially in your early stages of a career when you're quite caught up. That's your main focus. It's where you spend most of your productive time. One of our first guests, Craig Fenton, who I think one key takeaway I took from his episode was that to view work as one part of your portfolio, and that no job is going to kind of basically tick all the boxes, make use of all of your creative outlets. I know you, for example, do a lot outside of work as well in terms of your philanthropy and your involvement with various causes. So why don't you talk us a little bit through those?
Well, this is the problem. When you ask to describe yourself, you immediately start thinking whatever I say here is going to say I'm so self-centered and just to massage my own ego. So yeah, it's really hard to answer that question. I guess I hope I'm kind. I guess I don't think it's for you as an individual to say that about yourself, but I hope if somebody else was describing me, they might use kind as a word. Outside of my sort of main role, I do enjoy kind of a number of different avenues. Like I'm a school governor and I work with my kids' football team, but I'm also really interested in working with kind of young people, and so I work with charities like Career Ready, who are kind of trying to do a number of things, such as mentor younger people who may not get the opportunity to understand and see careers like the one I've been fortunate enough to have going through their schooling, and then other great charities like Working Options, which any professionals I'd encourage to get in contact with Working Options, because they're doing some amazing things with kind of outreach to schools where you're really just kind of giving younger people true insights into what the world of work is really like, and maybe interesting careers that they'd never thought of before. And if you don't have anything to kind of benchmark yourself against, it's very, very difficult to then decide what you want to do with yourself, which I'm sure you guys know as well. So all of that sort of stuff. I don't like talking about my charity work, guys. so isn't it?
So in terms of kind of early childhood and upbringing, did you go to a state school, or how was your upbringing generally? How would you describe it?
I did go to a state school, so which is interesting in itself. I think the stats are quite shocking actually. That I think it's about 6.5% of people are privately educated, but they make up about 75% of the sort of highest paying jobs in private equity and private equity like careers like venture capital. So I'm actually one of the few. I think as a sort of state educated dyslexic, I'm not sure what percentage that puts me in, but I assume it's quite a small number. But yeah, I was state educated all the way through my schooling. I didn't really even know what a private school was until I was about 21, and all of a sudden I went to Raleigh International, which is this kind of thing where you go I went out to Nicaragua and did a water project, but apparently it's predominantly private school children. I was like, didn't it? And they kept asking me what school I went to. I was like, Tesbourne Community School? You probably won't have heard of it. Which is funny. That's the name of another, sorry, can I pitch another podcast? Am I allowed to do that? Is that bad on you? Right. So Sophie Pender's 93% Club podcast, which is called What School Did You Go To? Which is for those of us that were sort of state educated and building professional careers and things. So yeah, but other, I had a super supportive family. My mum and dad, as much as it pains me to say, it's sort of still my kind of best mates today, and very loving and supportive family. Obviously, I was still am heavily dyslexic, to the point where it's quite funny. If you try and read anything I write, there's quite a lot of comedy in it generally. My eldest is now sort of 8 years old, and she's asking me like, "Daddy, how do you spell biscuit?" I'm like, not a clue. Ask your mother. And so I'm reading some of my old schoolwork. It's quite comedy really, but I kind of didn't realise when I was that age, or certainly didn't let it bother me too much, just kind of muddled on by. But I was probably quite serious as a kid. I think I'm sort of like Benjamin Button in some respects. I take life a darn sight less seriously than I did when I was younger. I wish I could shake my younger self and just be like, chill man, it's fine, it'll all be good, just chill. But I guess you learn that when you get older.
So you spoke about kind of some of the challenges growing up, and how did you navigate that journey after kind of your initial schooling years, kind of thinking of what to study at university, thinking of potential careers? Yeah, just talk us through a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, there's probably a few questions in one. So, stop me if I ramble, by the way. I have a horrible ramble. So I'm really, my parents were both entrepreneurs. So small businesses, just like in my DNA. It was, what I grew up with. So my mum ran a company that sold horse riding wear, which is the irony being that none of us in our family rode horses. We didn't have the money or the inclination to get on a horse, but for whatever reason, my mum owned a horse riding wear company, and that's a story in itself. My dad had a small kind of effectively he was like an insurance salesperson, but his own business, which he eventually turned into being a wealth manager. So, proper entrepreneurial story, start selling life insurance and things like that, and then build it into a full kind of wealth management practice. And I saw that entrepreneurial journey, and really as a kid I just didn't understand. I heard about people with proper jobs, but my parents never seemed to have them. They just worked out the garage, and our house was full of stock takes, and my dad worked every hour it sent. So I just was in that environment straight away. So I was always going to go down the route of business because I loved it. So that's why I chose that as my university course. So yeah, I can't remember the rest of your question. That was about it.
In terms of kind of life at university, you mentioned that you're dyslexic. How did being dyslexic affect your kind of time at university, and were your professors quite supportive of it? Were there the right support structures there to enable you to succeed there, or to kind of fulfill your potential?
Yeah, I'm pretty old. So, this is at the time when, whether people know how to handle dyslexics now, I'm not entirely sure anyway, but there was definitely less of an understanding back there. I think then it was certainly seen more as a disability. I think more and more it's been seen as something that's more just identified as a learning requirement, and you sort of have to put the right things in place. So I thought a lot about that. My journey with dyslexia it's been up and down, and it continues to be kind of up and down in the way that I think about it. There are times when I think am I even dyslexic? Is dyslexia even a thing? Who decided that dyslexia was a thing? And, I'm nothing like that next dyslexic, so I can't be a dyslexic. And then, something happens, like somebody, talks in directions at me, and I'm like, my head cannot cope with being talked at like that. Or, I was asked to spell subtle the other day, and I was like, oh my God, it's got to be in there somewhere, but God knows where it is. So, and then it reminds me that you're definitely dyslexic, Ed, I'm afraid. So yeah, as a young age, it was really hard, bottom sets for everything at school. So, lots of tears over feeling like you're not stupid or naughty, but yet you're being kind of punished for just struggling so much. That was really tough. And also with school, I just assumed I couldn't get it. So didn't really try probably as hard as that. And it was only really when maybe I got to university, actually the real turning point. And so I was at University of Hertfordshire. So I'd actually got better A-levels than people expected. And so maybe I could have, anybody that's going to the University of Hertfordshire, this isn't meant to be insulting at all, but I may have been able to end up at a better business school. But I did end up going to the University of Hertfordshire, which was a great time, some of the best years of my life. But as part of that, I went to San Francisco on a placement year. And so San Francisco at the time was just the most amazing city in the world. Beautiful place. And I met somebody who's still one of my very best friends now, a guy called Pete, who is like a molecular chemist at Cambridge, won the Stanford scholarship, like one of the cleverest guys I know, probably the cleverest person I know, and we became like firm friends. And I just remember walking down Ocean Beach in San Francisco with him, and him being like, so what are you going to do when you get back? What's your thoughts on your degree? And da-da. And I was like, well, I just hope I scrape a 2-1 and I can get on and do that. And Pete was just like, what do you mean get a 2-1? Like, why don't you push for a first? And I was like, well, because I'm dyslexic, I can't possibly get a first. I couldn't do that. That's just not what somebody with my background does. And he was like, well, that's nonsense. You just need to, he's like, you're clearly as smart as people I know, smarter than people I've been at university with, and and you just need to apply yourself in the right way and work harder. And it was, it was one of those conversations that even now I look back on and I'm like, I can still picture us on the beach, chewing this over, and like nobody, my mum and dad were amazingly supportive, but it was always like amazingly supportive, but they had been told by all my teachers how far I had to go just to kind of get to average. It's like, if he can get to average, if he does this, this and this. And then there was somebody there that I truly had a lot of respect for that was saying, no, you can do more than average. Like if that's your goal, fine, but like work hard and maybe, and I'm sure there's a lot there. And no one had ever said anything like that before. So I went back that year and I hadn't actually told anyone at the university I was dyslexic. I wanted to kind of do uni without being dyslexic just to see if I could. But then I was like, well, I might embrace it a bit more. And so I got some extra time in the exams. My very good friend of mine, my housemate Amy, who's ridiculously smart as well, she was very kind and sort of helped mentor me a bit through some of the exams as well. And so that was, really reaching out and getting help and not being afraid to get help was really beneficial. And so I did. I went on and got my first from university, but it was the first time I think I had fully leaned into A, being dyslexic, and B, going, actually, I'm going to try as hard as I possibly can now. I'm going to leave I'm going to leave nothing here. If I don't get it, I don't get it. But there's not, it won't be because of lack of effort. And so, yeah. And then, again, stop me if I'm rambling. Similar sort of thing happened, kind of more recently. This is it's a bit of a sad story that my old boss that I worked with at Octopus, actually for about 4 years, had been to Oxford, and an email came across his inbox saying, do you know anybody that'd like to do a qualification at Oxford? Because he'd been to Oxford University and etc. And he was like, you should do this. And I was like, Tim, I'm never going to Oxford. Like, be serious, man. And he was like, well, I think you could, do this and do that, and let's work together, and I'll help with your application letter. And yeah, so I did. I applied to Oxford and got in and did my master's, 3 or 4 years ago now, a while back now. But again, likewise, I was like, right, if I'm doing this, if I'm going to Oxford, I'm going to absolutely put my all into it. I'm going to really go for it, and not really have any excuses. I could easily, I think people can use things for an excuse really easily. And I was like, if I don't get a distinction, fine, but it's not going to be because I didn't try, and I'm not going to then use my dyslexia as an excuse. I say it's a sad story because I say it because Tim passed away, unfortunately, this year. So a massive influence in my life and somebody that believed in me. So his little bit of legacy in my life was that he encouraged me to do that.
Yeah, that's amazing, and I'm sorry for your loss. Sorry to hear that. I will come back to your time at Oxford specifically, but just kind of taking back to your undergraduate years and having found this, I guess, some sort of drive or motivation and belief in yourself that you can achieve above average. How did you then translate that into getting into the world of work and finding opportunities and making that transition?
You have to remember I'm an awful lot older than you guys are. So you're talking like decades ago since I was at university. The weird thing with somebody that's dyslexic, or often, I use the term gets thrown around generically, like every dyslexic thinks exactly the same way. It's like saying every neurotypical person would have exactly the same brain. They don't. Dyslexia is just something that's identified as a learning, learning requirement, learning need. But what was weird was that, like, whenever I did a job, I was always good at it. I remember everything from selling insurance, car insurance over the phone. I did that for a while, answer the phone, would you like car insurance? Smashed it. Worked at the golf course, being a greenkeeper, like smashed it. And people would say, you got a lot more intuition, you can like problem solve without me telling you exactly what to do. You just kind of get on with jobs when I tell you what I need and blah, blah. And I'm like, I was kind of puzzled by it. It was like, here at school, you're terrible and you can't regurgitate the facts that are being, parrot fashioned at you. But at work, where you use brain, I was like, fine. And so I was like, as long as I get a job, I don't. Oh, you always end up sounding like a massive big head on these things, don't you? But like, genuinely, I don't think there was ever a job that I did where I struggled with it. Which maybe that is in itself like a lesson in the skills we teach at school versus the skills you need for work. And I do like a work experience week here at Octopus where we get it's a massive week, get loads of people involved, but there's 12 young people from local state schools around the office that we get in. And one of the things I do is I do a whole thing on get these kids in, usually a bit shy, a bit nervous, get them around the boardroom table and all this. And at the end of the week, they're all chatting, they're all friends, they've all kind of come out of their shell a bit. And then I go try and do this session. Okay, what's the difference between work and school? What's the number one difference? And they're like, and they struggle. They struggle to kind of, I think at work you probably have to work longer hours, or, at work you have to work with different people. I'm like, no. The main difference is the only thing that matters at school is your grades. No one cares. You could be the biggest. You're not allowed to swear on these podcasts, are you? You could be the biggest wally. We'll use the word wally. You could be the biggest wally going at school. You could be horrible to every other person. You could be mean to your teachers. You could be rude as you like. You get straight A's. No one cares. You're a success. That is the definition of success. Everyone hates you. You've got no life skills. Got nothing you can bring to a workplace, but you've got straight A's because you can parrot fashion multiplication tables. Well done. That's success. But in the workplace, it's completely different. The only thing that matters is your reputation. Your grades go out the window. No one cares. It's whether people want to work with you. Whether you've got any sort of ability to problem solve for yourself. You've got any intuition. You've got anything, any drive. Do you work hard? Do you go the extra mile, or do you just moan and pull the life out of everyone by telling everyone what's not fair and what you haven't got, and et cetera, et cetera? No one wants to work with those people. And so it's understanding, I think, that, for me, I think I was all right in the workplace because, I always say there's a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me. There's no getting over that. I have to deal with that. But people don't generally outwork me. No one's going to outwork me. And that's in your gift. It's in your gift how hard you work, really.
No, that's really interesting. I think I was listening to a podcast Bear Grylls did quite recently when he talks about how he was always the kid in school which was kind of the kid in the back of the class, very shy, somewhat bullied as well. And that actually built a perseverance within him, which in later life came in a lot more useful compared to, the kids that are on the sports teams or, flying high within the social ladder within school. So that's a really interesting observation. I wanted to touch on something you mentioned a little bit earlier about your placement year in San Francisco. I mean, we're sitting in Octopus, and you work in the venture capital arm as well. Were you in San Francisco during the tech boom? Or was there any relation there, or was that pure coincidence?
You're probably thinking the 2012 tech boom, but I was there in the 2001 tech boom, which is the original before you guys were born, probably. And so, yes, I was there at the end of the tech boom, the original tech boom. It's quite funny because I arrived and the people before me were like, "Oh, you should have been here last year, mate." Literally, they went out every single night on companies that were just raised tons of money to go to free pizza parties and recruitment parties, and any interns before me just got immediately recruited into whatever tech company needed whoever. Not unsimilar to 2021 as it happens. So it was really interesting to be there during that period, especially working in Silicon Valley. Weirdly, I still didn't know what a VC was. I didn't know what a VC was until I don't know, well, until I came back to England, certainly. And I was walking along the South Bank with a friend of mine, Miles, and we were walking down the South Bank, and he was an accountant with Ernst & Young. Sorry, guys, you guys, PwC mafia over here. But he was with Ernst & Young, and he was like, I'm thinking of getting out of Ernst & Young. And I was like, well, what sort of careers do accountants have? I thought you just did audit. I was like, that's the only career for an accountant. And this is the problem with harping back, going off on a tangent, but that's the problem with state education, is that you learn things like accountant means audit, that means doing someone's annual accounts at the end of the year. You go to different privately educated, I'm assuming, and I don't know because I don't go, but I'm assuming you get much more idea of career fairs. You become an accountant, then you can work in corporate finance, then you can work on buy side, then you can work in investing, and Miles was saying, well, I'm thinking about going to work in venture capital. And I was like, what's that? And then he told me about that, and I was like, wow, that sounds amazing. That's exactly what I want to do. So I was there during 2021, so just at the end of the tech boom in San Francisco. And I think the main thing, the big thing that obviously happened then was 9/11. So I woke up in San Francisco and switched on my radio, and they were talking about a plane flying into the Twin Towers, etc., which I thought was in Chicago at the time. I was getting mixed up with the Sears Tower. And so that was really tough, because my boss's son worked in downtown New York, and at the time, everybody I worked with knew people that were working in or around the trade center. So that was probably more defining than being part of that tech boom, but nevertheless interesting.
So you've done this kind of placement year in San Francisco, being oblivious to the venture capital world around you, and coming back to the UK. What was your first kind of entry into the workplace? What did you do? How did you get involved with it?
Yeah, I should say the year in San Francisco, despite 9/11, was by far the best year of my life. And I don't mean that, so I shouldn't say that, apart from getting married and my children and all the rest of it. Other than that, of course, me and my friend Pete, who I talked about earlier, he basically spent, we used to say weekend started on a Wednesday. and I would genuinely encourage, if you have a chance to do things like that, you really, really lean into life. It's all cliches about life being short and all the rest of it. I'm not one to follow your dreams. I think that's a little bit cliche. I'm one to be more look at opportunities around you, create opportunities around you and run into them. And, I remember having a long conversation with my dad, driving back up to university, and I had a choice of SO in Leatherhead or going out to San Francisco to work for the Chamber of Commerce in San Francisco. And SO in Leatherhead was paying twice as much as a defined graduate scheme, et cetera, et cetera. And I spent 2 hours talking to my dad, driving back up to university, and him convincing me that I should be going to SO. And I literally got out of the car and was like, so what would you do? He went, oh, I'd go to San Francisco, but then I've always been irresponsible. And that just completely, that was it. Straight away, that's all I was going to do. And so go back to your actual question, just answered my own one. My first kind of intro into the workplace, I've always worked. Always. We didn't have any money as really growing up. It's not a sob story, and there's no sub story. We weren't, hungry or anything like that, but genuinely we had no money growing up. Not that I realised that. You don't as a kid, do you? It's it's really bizarre. It's like you realise we're pretty broke growing up. I'm like, nope, not at all. Always food on the, there was enough food on the table. Yes, we didn't go on fancy holidays or do anything. I remember my mum and dad being like, oh yeah, there were obviously the recession in the 90s that they had it hard in there when mortgage rates were crazy and they were leveraged up to the hilt. And I remember them being like, yeah, just once we're through this recession. I was thinking, wow, I'm pretty much enjoying life. If this is what it's like when it's bad, how good is it going to be when it's good? Do you know what I mean? What's it going to be like when it's good? And it was like, well, we could actually go on holiday that isn't in a caravan in a farmer's field somewhere or whatever. But so yeah, I'd always just worked. I worked for my mum, counting jodhpurs and stock in the garage. I worked for my dad, learning how to do that. And then I had paper rounds before you were legally allowed to have paper rounds, worked in kitchens, worked in McDonald's, worked in call centres. There was kind of a very, very much theme in our house that if you wanted the money, you're going to have to go and earn it yourself. And, I remember, so my sister, who I'm really close to, it's just me and my sister, who I'm really close to, I remember one parent's having a go, oh, the reason why there's no jobs for my son is because your sister's taken them all. Actually said that to me. because my sister was like working at the vineyard, working at the pub, because that's just what I was like, well, she just grafts, that's just what she does, that's just what we brought up with. So I don't know. I don't remember a time when I didn't have a proper job or didn't work.
Yeah, I'm just going to fast forward a little bit to when you were working at Rolls-Royce. What were your motivations to kind of join Rolls-Royce at the time? Was it something which appealed to you? I mean, it's quite an established business, whereas I guess before you kind of working in smaller businesses, or I just wanted to understand kind of what your motivations were.
Yeah, my motivations for working at Rolls-Royce, I think, it's really funny. Most parents would be like really proud of you for getting a job at Rolls-Royce, whereas my dad was like, "Oh, I'm just a bit disappointed that you've decided to go and work for a big corporate." I was like, he's like, "I thought you'd become an entrepreneur." But I think in my own mind, I wanted to try and do the conventional. I just wanted to see what it was like. I wanted to see if I could learn something, see what it was about, etc. And Rolls-Royce is a great company. Some of my best mates still there, still doing great things 20 years on, probably with incredible pensions and stuff and things like that, sensible things like that matter. I did 9 months. So, and I just, throughout that, I just remember grey buildings, and grey projects. The speed of work was just not for me. And it came to a head for me about when I got this email. It was like, the managing director of not of the whole of Rolls-Royce, by the way, just the managing director of the area that I was working in, the sector I was working on, is coming round on Wednesday. Please make sure you're all wearing a tie and be at your desk promptly and things. And I'm like, that's just alien to me. It's just weird. Like, entrepreneurs and leaders should be there. They should be seen. You should be able to find them. But the kind of mentality of that hierarchical structure that has been there for years and years and years, so hard to break down. Well, it's probably different now, but this is, I'm going back 20 odd years. It's probably different now, and I just couldn't handle that. You liken that to somewhere like Octopus, where I am today. Simon Rogerson sits in reception. Like, if he was in today, he'd be there at the desk. The guy that basically, created Octopus Group, which owns Octopus Energy and all the rest of it, all those, the household names and that. He wants to see what's going on, wants to be amongst it all, and he wants to be visible. So if anyone wants to talk to him, then they can talk to him. They can, they can put their 2 pennies worth in, and he wants to hear it. So that really resonates with me. I get excited by that. I don't get excited by being told to wear a tie on a certain day because certain people are coming round. And so my Rolls-Royce career didn't last too long before I very quickly joined a startup. So after about 9 months, I joined a startup called Cortec. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. It was called Cortec, and they were doing some exciting stuff, and I just decided to join them and be employee number 1.
So would you say your greatest learning from Rolls-Royce was that you didn't like working for the large corporates and wearing suits and working in grey buildings?
Yeah, I don't mind wearing suits. I'm pretty scruffy, as you can tell, so it's probably not for me. But I think with that, just say it wasn't so much the tie. If I had to wear a tie every day, I'd have been all right with it. It was more the mentality, the idea that the leader should want you to change for them rather than understand what was going on. I just think that's a weird way to lead. Yeah, I just think that the pace of it, the involvement, the kind of the path, and it just, I maybe deep down I always knew it. I remember on the graduate day at Rolls-Royce, when it really started from day one. We went to the graduate induction, and I was like, oh my God, we're going to get the chairman of Rolls-Royce talking to us about how 50 graduates, future leaders of the company. I'm like, surely there's going to be the CEO of Rolls-Royce, the chairman of Rolls-Royce going to welcome us. And it was the person that did the welcome thing was like some manager in one division about 10 runs down. This is the future leaders of the company. And I remember them being like, who here is here for a career for life? And everybody put their hand up, and then who here is just seeing how it goes and seeing what they like? Literally, I was the only hand. I put my hand up. I was like, okay, clearly I've not read the indoctrination here, and so that wasn't for me. But the small company was, and that worked, and had a great sort of 3.5, 4 years working for the startup.
You spoke a little bit about the difficulties, especially when looking at kind of public schools versus private schools, when looking at networks which people are sometimes born into. and the difficulty of actually understanding what options are out there. Like, for example, I'm similar. I was lucky enough to have parents who are professionals, both in the medical field, but I knew nobody in my vast network or close network who worked in finance. So I kind of had to meet people and figure out stuff as you go along. Now, with your own journey, you tried something, you tried a conventional route, kind of an established graduate program type of route, found that wasn't for you, and then found a startup. How did you go about finding this startup? And following question, what advice would you have for young people today who perhaps have that same challenge? What advice would you have on figuring stuff out at that very early stage and understanding what's out there?
I mean, I think if you're younger, the first thing is don't rush it. Like, you don't need to panic. Life's, although I've already said life is short, but life is also long in some respects as well. Like, people have multiple careers. So I don't think you need to panic. But again, it's just about having the blinkers off and seeing what's around you and making it happen. So that startup. So what happened is I was already thinking about leaving, and I'd started to think about joining my dad and maybe taking over. Even at that age, I've been, for many years I thought about taking over my dad's business and whether I do that. But even back then, I'd started to do like my financial planning qualifications and things like that, just to, maybe that's the thing I should be doing, just to give myself optionality, literally. So I'm a qualified financial advisor, despite the fact I've never done financial advice or anything, just to give myself optionality, just to take the blinkers off and make sure you're prepared for what's around me. But I met this guy at Rolls-Royce who was doing something called knowledge management and doing consulting, and he's just started doing consulting projects outside of Rolls-Royce in managing corporate knowledge, and then was talking about maybe starting this startup. So you've got two options then. You can either go, wow, this is really interesting, I'm going to go and say to that guy, hey, look, if you need an employee, I'll be employee number one. Or you just kind of go into a shell and you don't do anything. And so generally I do the latter. I should say, like, the job that I got in San Francisco, that wasn't advertised. I just wrote to every single person that I could think to write to, and spent any spare time I had just writing to people randomly to say, hey, could you think about employing me, because I want to come to America to do my placement year. I don't want to go to, I want to stay in England. And similarly, you just have to be aware of what's around you and what opportunities are around you. I'd already tried to start a company with somebody else. That didn't really work, kind of on the side. Probably shouldn't mention that now. I don't think Rolls-Royce can sue me. It's like 20 years ago. So I'd already tried to start a company on the side. That hadn't really sort of ignited. And then this opportunity came, and I was like, yeah, okay. And then they said, oh, right, we are starting the company now. We are going to do this. Are you sure you want to join? And I was like, hell yes. Get me signed up. And that's how I started. But it's all about, if you're interested in, the amount of times people say, oh, I'm really interested in getting into venture capital. I say, okay, that's that. There's 500 applications for every analyst role that we have in a week, usually. Really competitive, super competitive. I'm like, how many VC events have you been to? None. What tech startups do you know and have worked with? None. What accelerators and incubators have you gone to? And then, then all of a sudden you'll find somebody that's like, oh, well, actually, I do mentoring for, I don't know, maybe it's a female founders network, or I do, I've learned how to financial model off my own back, and I've made some Crowdcube investments to try and learn how to do it. And you're like, okay, so this person is really kind of building their skill set. They're actually leading into things that they're really interested in and seeing what's out there. So I think my advice is generally is, number one, just be really cognizant of everything around you, and then number two is, if you're interested in things, start to just go to events, go to things, do a bit of research, see what's out there. Why do you guys start a podcast? Because you took the initiative, that you decided it was something you wanted to do and it was interesting. You took a risk at doing it. Most people moan about things that haven't come to them, and it's because they haven't taken a risk to do it, because they're afraid of failure. Yeah. Whereas I think because I was, maybe from an early age, because I'm dyslexic, I was pretty rubbish at everything. I just constantly failed every test, failed every exam, never got any good marks. I'm never worried about failure. My entire kind of early journey is failure. So that also means that it allows you to be open for opportunities and to take risks and that sort of thing.
Just kind of sticking with that point about failure. Now, I guess fast forwarding a little bit into more of your journey as a leader yourself and working in organizations, building teams, how do you kind of inculcate that same ethos within the people you work with, where you help them feel, I guess, comfortable with failure and recognize the importance of learning from failure rather than being afraid of it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's really personal to each person. So I don't think there's like one formula that can work for each individual. Some individuals are very target based, and they want you to set out the targets, what should be expected, what should be achieved, and then I can either achieve it or not achieve it, and I'm very results focused. Others are more kind of like emotionally, differently, maybe more emotionally focused, and they want to, I don't know, find things that make them feel like they've achieved something that are not quantitative in the slightest, just completely different. So you have to really map yourself and work with that individual. That's what's really exciting, isn't it, about managing people and things, is that everyone's different, and I think you trying to work around that is really important. But I just, if people are worried about failure, say it's about, well, I'd say too, it's like if somebody's rubbish at something, I mean, like, you just be honest and be like, yeah, it's probably not for you. Like, if somebody said, Ed, I reckon you could go up for a spelling test, I'd be like, I'm not the person for that, and I don't need anyone to try and encourage me to do it. But there's I work with some incredibly smart people, and sometimes it's just like, look, I genuinely, you're really, I believe in you. I know you can do this. Now, if you don't feel comfortable, fine, but I believe you can do this. And look, do you know what the worst thing that's going to happen is? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Like, I mean, I take the job that I do, we invest other people's money, and losing other people's money, despite what people might think about investors and stuff, is horrible. Like, lose sleep, a lot of sleep. And take it really seriously, because people have trusted you, and if you lose their money, breaching that trust is awful. Maybe not for everybody. For me, it's awful. I hate it. No, but I remember there was one particular time when, oh my God, I'd worked 6 months at a project, and it was going so well. I was being, like, you're doing so well, and everyone was telling me how well I was doing. It was all good. And we'd relied on a third party to get some advice over something, and it started to go wrong. It doesn't really matter what it was, ultimately. It started to go a little bit wrong, and then all the advice that we'd got turned out to be all wrong. And all of this 6 months work, all of the kind of money and people that I had invested in this project and everything else, and I honestly, I could barely breathe, let alone like make it through. And I never forget this. I don't even know if it worked. I don't know why it worked so well, but it did for me at the time. I rang my dad. I'm like, Dad, it's all gone wrong, all these people relying, and my dad went, see the people on the train next to you, because I was on the train going home back to Richmond at the time. So I see the people on the train next to you. I was like, yeah, I see them. He's like, no one gives a shit. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, Ed, no one gives a shit. Like, life moves on. And I don't know, for whatever reason, it feels like terrible advice now, but at the time it was really comforting. We're a very small, we're here for a fraction of a moment of time, and you do the best you can. And that advice really helped me. And I do try and sort of portray that, when other people are trying to take risks, or should I take risks? It's like, yeah, what's the worst that's going to happen, really? As long as you go in with good intentions. I mean, like, don't go around murdering people. What's the worst that's going to happen? I mean, like, as long as you go in there with, like, your best intentions, and you can prove you can work as hard as you can, then nobody can fault you. As long as you're honest, you're not being, fraudulent or something, then, what's the worst that can happen? And I kind of, another time, this makes me sound like a terrible investor, by the way, because it's going to relay all the times things went wrong. But another time that something went wrong, another project, completely different project, a few years later now, but even worse situations it happens. And that one, really fortunate at Octopus, one thing we do at Octopus is we give like free mental health coaching and stuff like that. So if you are struggling at work or whatever it might be, you can sit down and you can see a coach and to take you through whatever it is. I mean, like, how cool is that? I mean, what sort of company does that? But there was one time when I was going through a bad patch, a few investments had gone wrong, felt really bad, felt like I'd let the side down, and talked to one of the coaches there, and they were just like, so you keep falling on your sword, like you keep apologizing, you keep trying to, and I was like, yeah. Is it making it any better? I'm like, not really, no, I just keep feeling bad about it. And he was like, the truth is, the only thing you can do is the best you can do. Did you try the best you could do? Were you honest? Were you open? So yeah, and he was like, that's all you can do. He's like, yeah, but what about my reputation? He said, your reputation will be what your reputation is. You can't really control that. And different people view you differently. You'll have a different reputation to lots of people. And therefore, the only thing you can ever do is your next best thing. It's like, what can you do next that's good? And it was good, actually. It was really good advice. I often think that, like, when things are really shit, and sorry, I swore the second time, things are really bad, and, you know, maybe not going as well as you'd hoped, just always trying to do that next best thing.
You know, so would you say that Octopus, or the kind of the place that you worked at before, even, they gave you that parachute where they were comfortable with failure, or is that something that you kind of had to develop within yourself?
Well, so I think I've always been comfortable with failure generally, just because, you know, it's been kind of like ingrained in me from such an early age with learning difficulties. But Octopus is, you know, Simon, you know, he writes like a weekly bulletin thing, and it's often the theme of his weekly bulletins, which is failure's good. I like failure. We've failed at more than we've succeeded at. The risk is not taking risk. It's like big companies don't take risk. They hate risk, and that's why they just get stagnated and old and die. And, you know, you look at what Octopus Energy's done, it's just like it took a market that shouldn't, you know, was just so stuck in its ways, built brand new technology to run it, and took a hell of a lot of risk. But at the same time as starting Octopus Energy, we started other products as well, you know, and they didn't work. They failed. And, you know, Simon's always like, don't care. You know, do not care. We'll continue to invest in things that won't work. We'll take big bets and they'll go wrong. And, you know, that last one, I did apologise. I was like, emails. I was like, really sorry, Simon. I didn't mean to make it all go wrong. And he was like, really appreciate it. But, you know, we make big bets here, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't.
Now, working in venture capital, do you think that sort of comfort with failure that's kind of ingrained in you to some extent is a differentiating factor and a positive factor? We've spoken to guests before who speak about when dealing with VC investments and dealing with a specific investment, you kind of know, you kind of accept that it's probably going to go to zero because, you know, out of maybe 40 or 50, you bet on one or two being successful. So do you think specifically in your role that gives you an advantage?
I'd say the first thing, I don't like failure, just to put it out there. If things could go right, that would be much better. You know, so, I mean, you definitely, within the world of VC, you cannot be somebody that panics. In fact, I had a colleague, a good friend of mine still, lovely guy, I won't name him just because it would embarrass him if he ever listened to the podcast, but like, and he struggled with that. He really struggled with it. He couldn't, the stress of the idea that things could fail. And you're balancing tons of risk all the time, and you're making judgment calls. And like you get trigger shy because if you basically every small investment is so risky, really. You know, there's so much that can go wrong. You know, new competitors swallowed by a big competitor, management team turn out to not be who they say they are, technology not as good as it was sold to you, customers don't want it, etc. There's just so much that if you worried so much, you just would never make an investment. And some people, a lot of people, I think that level of risk taking is. Yeah, I wouldn't say risk taking because we try and mitigate the risk and we try and understand it, but that level of judgment and acceptance of risk, that better way of doing it, that kind of risk acceptance isn't for everyone. I mean, what I would say is not all VC is kind of the same. So at Octopus we manage around about 2 billion euros in VC money, one of the most active VCs in Europe. Sorry, just a very quick pitch. We're investing in the ideas, industries and people that will change the world for the better. And we do that across multiple sectors and at multiple stages. We've got early stage teams that go in like all the way to first check. So like ideation stage, got a great idea, maybe started to map it out and what it's going to look like, maybe made a beta version, and they'll invest at that stage, like literally before customers. And then all the way through to the team that I work in, which is kind of a bit further on. So I only invest in companies that are at least a couple of £1 million worth of revenues, and only in B2B software, business-to-business software, the sexiest of all the investment categories. But that works for me. You know, that works well for me as an investor because of a number of reasons. Because I like the financial analytics of it, and so when you've got revenue, you can start to analyze things. You know, before revenue is literally, it's much more qualitative. But I like the financial side of the analytics and looking through that. But, you know, the other side of it is as well, it's like I'm probably overly optimistic. I love entrepreneurs. You know, my parents are entrepreneurs. I love seeing new businesses and the enthusiasm of entrepreneurs. Whereas the job actually requires you to say no 99.9% of the time, literally that often. Because if you think that, you know, the early stage first check fund will get 5,000 pitches a year and they'll make 10 investments. the numbers are tiny of what actually gets invested into versus of what your approach. You have to get used to saying no. Whereas I just want to invest in everything. I just think everything was a great idea and just love the enthusiasm. So yeah, although you have to be somebody that accepts risk, I think the stage in which I invest allows me to kind of measure that acceptance of risk alongside, the other fun part of VC, which is kind of working with those enthusiastic entrepreneurs and getting G'd up about what might happen next.
Yeah, I think one question I want to ask off the back of that is kind of how do you say no? Like, because there's always a right way of doing things and a wrong way of doing things. Like, how do you deliver bad news as a leader? Because obviously, for example, if you're a startup founder and you come to Octopus with great ambition and you're very excited maybe to work with your team, and then you come to the end of the road and it turns out, Octopus aren't going to be investing in us. How do you deliver the news to the founder where you're not necessarily kind of squashing on their ambition, or kind of how do you deal with that relationship?
I think trying to be transparent as possible straight away. I've got like 2 opportunities I'm working on right now with founders that I said no to 2 years ago. But you just try and say it in the right way. You don't try and lead people down the garden path. You don't try and, overly kind of promise things that that you can't deliver. You can try and lay out the decisions logically. I think where people, it's like everything in life, isn't it? I think where people get themselves in trouble is where they maybe say one thing to try and encourage the person. It's often done from a good place. You try and encourage them. Oh yeah, we'll definitely invest in you. Yeah, you're the best thing since sliced bread. And then you see the numbers. You're like, whoa, don't want to invest in this. But you've already told them they're the best thing since sliced bread, even before you've seen the numbers. So now they think they're going to get investment, and you've not done your job properly. Better to be honest at each stage, and that might mean what you see is sometimes you lose a few deals because other people will be selling them the dream, knowing that actually by the time it gets to the crux of it, they might not invest or whatever. I think the hardest thing is doing kind of specific to the VC role in that is when you do follow-on funding, for example. So you've invested in a company, you've been on the dream together, hasn't worked out, they need more money to survive, and then you've got to say, I'm not going to put any more money into this. I just think it's good money after bad, or we are going to put more money in, but it's not going to be with you as the helm or the leader, and again you just try and be as honest and professional as you can and not kind of sugarcoat things. I think people generally people appreciate honesty. They might not agree with you, but it's when they feel like they've been disrespected that I think people get upset. Same as if you're leading something and somebody's not getting promoted and they might think they should deserve a promotion, but if you've been telling them all year that they should be getting promoted and they're doing a really great job, and then you say, oh sorry, it didn't work out, they'd be annoyed. If you're honest about where they are on the curve and where they are on their pathway, then they're much more accepting of it.
I wanted to touch on your time at Oxford and doing your masters there. You mentioned it a bit earlier, how one of your colleagues kind of mentored you into Oxford and getting your application through. I wanted to ask you a bit about the selection process itself, how that journey was for you, and kind of what's the one tip you would give to a candidate applying for a competitive course such as an MBA there?
I don't remember the application being too tricky, to be honest. But I put everything into it, prepared it, wrote the answers to the application questions, stayed over in Oxford the night before to do the interview so I wasn't tired and I wasn't late, and just prepare everything you possibly can. I have no idea how competitive it actually was for me to get on that course. I assume it was fairly competitive, but I'm not sure. I did an executive MBA, and at that point it's probably as much to do with like whether you can pay the bills or not. But over half the people were directors of large corporates that were on that course. It was amazing. You had like senior directors of everybody from Red Bull to other private equity firms, and just people that De Beers Diamonds, and just incredible amount of knowledge within that room, which was fantastic. I think that what I would say maybe the one thing is like really the passion for why you want to do that. That's what they really want to know, is like in the case of Oxford, it's kind of like what is your reasons for doing this and why Oxford? If those things don't come out, or if you say my reason for doing this is because I really want to make a lot more money and I think by doing this I'll get a lot more money, or if the reason for doing this is I really want the Oxford logo on my CV because I think it'll be really useful to my career, No, what they want to know is like how you want to be inspired, and you know how you think that course will set you up to change the world for the better. You know, which is really funny because going on a course like that, it was all like, I say, directors of big corporates and things like that. They'd had amazing careers, super successful people, and a lot of them had decided, yeah, what do you want to do next? They're like, oh, I want to go and build an NGO, or you know, that's why they were doing it. They were reflecting on a point in life where they wanted to actually take a different route, take a change, and they were using the course as a way of moving forward in whatever they wanted to do next, which was usually something which had a lot less monetary value than what they were doing currently. So yeah, get that passion over, really understand why you're doing it, and try and do it for other reasons than just the financial rewards of what it might bring.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I'd never imagined that actually. Kind of a group of execs going into a business school and coming out the other end wanting to work in NGOs. But that's really interesting. And in terms of your own experience there, if there's one thing that kind of stuck with you through that experience, what would that be?
Oh, there's so many things that stuck with me. It was a humbling experience in some respects, being around as many kind of brilliant people as I was. And, you know, I probably get a text message from one person on my course, even 4 or 5 years later, I probably get one text message a day from one of the guys or people on the course. And it was, you know, so it's brilliant to build that network. I think what was really interesting about that, I said executive MBA, full of people that have done really well in their careers. You can imagine the amount of alpha that was in that room at any one time. And normally, you know, like, I'm probably I'm the guy amongst a group of friends that organises the holiday, you know, everyone transfers the money to, because they're the ones booking the flights and all this sort of stuff. And like, that's always been my role, you know, like that's just who it is. And I think what I realised then is where you have a group of people maybe that are a bit more alpha or more that inclined, is the way in which you kind of work with those people. You've got to be careful and different, and I don't know how to put it, but there's just incidents of like where maybe you could force things through weight of personality, or force your way of doing things through, I should say, through your weight of your personality. You just like, you can't do that. You know, you can't do that in the same way. You know, the way in which you influence people, that's kind of what I was looking for. The way in which you can make influence and mold and get things in your direction, you know, is not by kind of forcing it through in maybe the ways that I was just like, get shit done. Like, what's the best thing about me? Kind of just getting shit done, really. And you have to be much more careful about how you get shit done when you're in a group of people like that. But, you know, some of the most brilliant friends I've still got that I was on that course with.
I think we're going to touch a bit on kind of, we've spoken about this in detail already, about the dyslexic thinking and kind of that area of your journey so far. I wanted to ask you what you think are the common misconceptions about dyslexia, and what needs to be done to get those debunked. How can we as a kind of society overcome those misconceptions?
I think the one thing that upsets pretty much every dyslexic that I know is when somebody says, oh yeah, I'm a little bit dyslexic. I think I'm like 10% dyslexic. Or like, yeah, I think I'm kind of like 10% dyslexic, but more with maths. Or they go, oh, you know what, you know, my husband's dyslexic. It's never been diagnosed, but honestly, you try and get him to spell anything, can't do it. Or, which I had the other day, and you're like, it's not like that. You can't just be 10% dyslexic. You can't be a little bit dyslexic, but with, you know, I can spell, but I'm not good at numbers and whatever, you know. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to keep dyslexic to a small group of people, or dyslexia to a small group of people and somehow own it, but I'm just saying that that is the misconception, that it's kind of a little bit of a struggle with certain things. It's like a wholesale change in the way in which your brain works, and it doesn't just affect spelling, it affects all sorts of things that go on. Like I said, things that I really struggle with are things like sort of instant recall of memory when people are kind of saying directions to me. So if you were like, right, how do you get down to up to King's Cross from here, and you tried to give me directions, I'd be like, my brain just wouldn't be able to take it and order that information quick enough. Now if we sat here with a map and we plotted it all out, and then I'd figure it out and I'd get there. And I guess the other misconception is that all dyslexia brains work in the same way. You know, obviously some parts, people have strengths in some areas and weaknesses in the other. Like my reading is is fine. Like I never struggled to read for whatever reason, maybe not quite as quickly as others. That was never a problem. So, and where other people that will be with dyslexia, that will be a real problem. But I think the biggest one is that you could be a little bit, it's just a completely different kind of mind, as it were.
So, I mean, I'm just trying to understand it myself more than anything. Is dyslexia something that you're born with, or is it something that can develop in later life as well?
No, you're born with it. I think there is science in it and unfortunately, because I don't have a very good memory, I can't remember the exact things, but there's parts of your brain that just they've looked at that just operate in different ways. The way the signals fire to each other are just different. And there's lots of YouTube videos, good TED Talks on it and this sort of thing. But yeah, no, it's biological, it's often hereditary, and it's really interesting. So one of the positive, I'll reframe it because it's often thought of in a negative way in terms of dyslexia and things that you can't spell, you struggle to read, or you struggle with memory recall and things like that. But one thing that I found that really showed me actually, okay, my brain works really well for this sort of stuff, and put that down to my dyslexia, is in seeing things very, very quickly and how projects should be at a high level. So if I gave you an example, like the work experience week we do, I'll just bring that up again. Whereas, you might get a room of people all throwing around ideas and really kind of like taking a while to come up with it, and who should we have and what should we do in this. It's like you say, oh, can you organise a work experience week? And immediately my head would be like, well, first of all, I'd probably come up with the idea to do the work experience week in the first place, but then I'd map out the entire week straight away. Like I'd know, I have that sort of person there, that person there, this person there, or fit together like this is what we'll do over lunchtime, and straight away that project would be done. And when I was doing my masters at Oxford, we did this thing called a Petacucha, which you've probably not heard of it. It's like we have to do a presentation of 20 pictures. So you just have to do pictures, and you have to do it on a topic. And so I think this was like 20 pictures on a topic around inspiration. I was like, okay, so I sat at my desk, got my PowerPoint out. I was like, I'm going to do the inspiration of an entrepreneur and how I found entrepreneurs inspiring. And I very quickly, in my head mapped it out. And I went up to the table after about 15 minutes. I was like, right, I've got my presentation. I'm ready to do it. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I've done the presentation. I've got my 20 pictures, like you said. I've got them on, I'm ready to do it on inspiration. And they're like, no, you've got the entire day to do this presentation. This is not like a 15-minute thing. This was the entire day. And I was like, but the way that my head works is like, it's amazing when you speak to another dyslexic. I was talking to Jamie Wade, who from Talent Co, who is a dyslexic screening company, and we were talking about education, and it was just amazing because straight away Jamie was like, and if I was really doing education, I'd do this, and then I'd do that, and X, Y, and Z, and just again, as a fellow dyslexic, you could see that he was just immediately problem solving, immediately seeing. So, yeah, there were positives as well.
Just carrying on with that, can you think of any examples in your day job as an investor where a different perspective is a positive and is a differentiator?
All the time. I'm very fortunate that me and my boss Richard, I get on really well with. He's a great guy, and I've worked together for many years now. We are like chalk and cheese. I mean, he is ridiculously smart. Very quick thinker. Very. He's the sort of person you want in a quiz because he'll know all the facts to everything, all the rest of it. But I think then if there's like, hey, we need a new process or a new team structure, or we need a new way of like, we did the other day, like how do we allocate deals, for example, to people and things like that. And it's like, okay, well, we could do it like this. We set it out like that, and da-da-da. And so it's nice because I think he appreciates that maybe that's kind of where my side comes in, and he's much better at all the stuff that takes a high intellect, and those two things kind of work well together. So yeah, or anything from building processes to organising the Christmas party for the team or whatever, it's like I'll do that thinking.
You touched on delegation there very briefly. So I've recently read a book called Turning the Ship Around, which you might have read. It's by a US submarine admiral who goes into a submarine squadron which is performing poorly, and he kind of turns the ship around, as the title suggests, and kind of makes it into a high-performing team. And one of the questions he asked in the book, which I thought was quite interesting, is, as a leader, when you're thinking about delegation, what do you worry about the most, and how do you overcome that worry when delegating things?
Obviously, you worry about the person not delivering on what you've asked them to, and not doing it. I mean, I think that I'm fortunate in Octopus. Is like Octopus has a culture that people are hardworking, and you don't really survive very long if you're not kind of delivering what you said you would do. It's very different to other places. So what do I worry about most? Honestly, here I don't worry too much. I think giving that person time to deliver it to you, such that if it isn't what you wanted, you've got time to change it and turn it around. I think the problem with delegation happens when you give somebody a deadline, which is the same as the delivery line, and then you say, oh well, it's not how I wanted it or not how I thought it should be done. And you're like, okay, well, as a leader, you've got to allow that person. Well, I learned early on as well with delegation that when you delegate something, you shouldn't delegate something expecting it to be how you would do it. You delegate something to solve the problem. If it solves the problem, that's the important bit, not that you've got there the way that you wanted to get there. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you ever had a boss and they're like, oh, write me this, draw me a poster for whatever, and you put the poster together, like, oh, I actually thought it should be a different colour. You're like, well, you have to accept that it's not gonna be how you wanted it. But the second thing I definitely learned is that you better put in some fat, so that if there are essential things to do with that task, that you can work with that person to put those things right, and you should encourage them to work to those sorts of to work to the timelines if you possibly can. Yeah, I'd say those were the main things.
Thank you for that. So the final question I'll ask before we wrap up, just touching on the theme of mentorship. Now you've spoken about quite a few different people who've had a significant impact on your career, on your personal life, and you yourself have been recognized as being a mentor of note. What advice would you have in terms of what makes a good mentor, one, and how young people can seek out appropriate mentors and build that relationship?
Yeah, I think so. I've had very mixed results, I'd say, with mentoring. So, one of my first mentees, Juwan, who I mentored through Career Ready, is just the most amazing person. Just one of those people full of energy. But she really leaned in. You know what I mean? She took the opportunity, and I think as the mentor-mentee relationship is as much about the mentee. In fact, I'll rephrase that. The mentor-mentee relationship is more about the mentee than it is the mentor. Like, the mentor can only give what you ask from them. And what I found, like where I've done it with other people, I'd be like, okay, so what do you want to get from this? Oh, I don't know. Okay, well, what are you trying to do? I don't know. I just hope you could help me trying to find a job. I'm like, okay, well, my job as a mentor is not to find you a job. It's to try and work with you to find out, the path that you want to go on, what's going to interest you, like what skills you need to develop, what you need to work on. And so, yeah, it definitely understands that. And because of that, if you're looking for a mentor and you're a mentee, then make sure it's somebody you want to talk to. Like, make sure it's somebody you want to take the advice from. Because actually, there's probably a lot more people willing to mentor you than you think. If you go there's tons of organisations that can put you with a mentor. People like Career Ready. That's it. One done. Just go and contact them. But you've got to know what you're trying to get out of it, and not expect some sort of silver bullet towards a career. Is what I would say. Come armed with questions and asked to do practice interviews, and asked to people to look over things or help you work out difficult situations and all this sort of things. From a mentor side, it's about listening. I'll go back to Jawan. One thing that she was deciding whether she wanted to go to do a degree apprenticeship or do a degree, and she was smart. She could do either. And I was like, oh, you should do a degree. I did a degree, and that's what you should do. And she was like, well, the degree apprenticeship, I come out, it's 4 years with UBS. They pay for me to study at Exeter University. I come out with, I was like, what? Sorry? It's like, you do 4 years at UBS, and then you get a degree, and then you come out with all the qualifications, you get no debt, and you get paid really well. You definitely do the degree apprenticeship. Definitely don't go and do a degree. And she wanted to stay in London, and so I think that was a real lesson for me as a mentor, to be like, my job is to listen to the options and listen to the thought process, and then like weigh it up together and truly understand that for an individual. Their life experience is completely different to yours, so you have to respect that. If you get it right, it can be super rewarding, super fun, but it's it might take a while. Jawan was somebody through Career Ready, and that worked really well. Other people I've mentored, I think it's been more on a personal. I've mentored lots of other people through other organisations, but it's only been like maybe a few sessions, and it's sort of fizzled out or whatever. They just haven't leaned into it. So where it's worked better is where I've known that person, had a personal connection, and you can do it. And I think there's this kind of idea that you just need to sign a form and get a mentor, and then actually you're better off trying to probably seek out somebody yourself, or meeting somebody to click with and asking them, once you build a connection, to be your mentor, because you'll probably get more from it, and they'll be able to give you better advice as well.
I think that's fantastic advice, and I think the whole conversation was really, really interesting, and a lot of insights there, and quite a fresh perspective on a lot of topics as well. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, guys. I feel like I've just rambled at you for like an hour about nonsense. So
I think it was a very, very entertaining and very insightful ramble. So that's what we're all about here. So fantastic, and thank you so much for your time.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.